right, so today we're doing chapter 3, day 6, and pictured below is the graph of y equals 4x minus 2x squared, which is a parabola. And since it's negative 2x squared, that means that it should be opening downward, and I have highlighted it on this graph below. We'll talk more about all the other things on the graph in a second, but we're going to continue reading the problem. Along with iterations, starting with a seed value of x sub 0 equals 0.25. All right, so let's analyze the graph a little bit. We have a parabola. We have many points that are on this graph. They're labeled with letters. So we have point A, we have point B, we have point C, we have point D, and so on. We also have a diagonal line, and that line is actually really important. So what that line is the line y equals x. And everything on that line has coordinates like, sorry, this is as good as I can get in terms of a straight line here. Everything on this line has points like 0, 0, 1, 1, 5, 5, 1,000, 1,000, 2.67, 2.67. So every x coordinate and every y coordinate are the same. Now those lines, this line is going to help you find the coordinates of these points. So let's go back to read the rest of the question. Find the coordinates of points A through K. We're going to go in that order. And then we'll get to part B and part C when we are all done. So right now we need to know, well, what is an iteration? So iterations start with a seed value, which you think of when you plant a seed, or x sub 0, it's an initial value. So that's what a seed value is. This is your initial or starting value of 0.25. All right, so we're going to use that information. We could have any starting value along with this parabola, this exact parabola, and it would change all of our answers. Oops. All right, so let's go back. We know it starts at 0.25. All right, now, if we follow this along the x-axis, I'll go to a different color here. All right, so we have 0.25 on the x-axis right there. Make that a little bit thicker. All right, we get to point A, and we notice that it's on the line y equals x. Well, what do we know about all points on the line y equals x? Well, we know that the x-coordinate and the y-coordinate are exactly the same. So if the x-coordinate is 0.25, well then we know that the y-coordinate is also 0.25. All right, so point A is at 0.25, comma 0.25. All right, but now to get point B, let's go back to our graph and see what happens. So we're going to continue following this line. All right, so we're traveling up this line. We get to point A. All right, well, if we notice that we follow this vertical line, it gets us to point B. So if it's on the same vertical line, it has to at least have the same x-coordinate. So we know that the x-coordinate of B is 0.25. Well, now how do we find the y-coordinate? What part of the graph is it on? Well, it's on the parabola. So now this is where we care about what's the equation of the parabola. Well, if I know the x-coordinate, I can certainly find the y-coordinate by substituting the number in. All right, so we can do this a couple different ways. I'll show you a few different ways on the calculator. The easy way is just type in 4 times 0.25 minus 2 times 0.25 squared. All right, now we got 0.875. There we go. All right, well, that's one way, but let's do it actually by graphing. Okay, so we go to y equals, we type in 4x squared minus 2, nope, sorry, just regular 4x minus 2x squared. All right, I'm going to hit graph. Here's my parabola. Not as zoomed in as the one that we have on our worksheet here, but same idea. So we need to figure out, well, what would happen if our x coordinate were 0.25? What would my y coordinate be? So I'm going to hit the trace button, and I'm just going to type in 0.25. This allows your x value to be substituted into the equation, and there's your y value, 0.875. All right, so I'm going to show you a third way to do it in a minute, but we'll go continuing on. All right, so now we got to go back to our graph, and we're going to follow this line from point B to point C. Okay, so now what do we notice about point C? Well, it's on the green line. That's y equals x. I should probably label this line. I'm just going to do that. This line is y equals x, just as a reminder. All right, so we know that it's in a horizontal line. Point C is in a horizontal line with point B, so it should have the same y coordinate, right? If you follow it along to the y-axis, it should have the same y coordinate. So what's our y coordinate? Well, 0.875. And since the x coordinate and the y coordinate, oops, trying to stay consistent with my colors here. All right, then my x and y coordinate need to be the same. So 0.875, comma, 0.875. All right, then we're going to continue on to point D. All right, so point D, follow up here. Now we notice it's back on the parabola, which means that my x coordinate, x and y, my x coordinates of points C and D have to be the same. So I know that it should start off with 0.875. But how do I figure out my y coordinate? Well, since I have my graph pulled up, I'm just going to go back and type in 0.875. What happens when that's x? My y coordinate is 1.96. 875. All right, so these decimals are getting a little bit longer, and I'm going to have to write a little bit more. So we'll do maybe one more like this, and then I'll show you that third method. All right, so moving on to point E. We're going to follow our path here, and we notice that we're back on y equals x. Okay, so E has to have the same x and y coordinate, which means that since the y coordinates of D and E are the same, we know that it needs to be 1.96, oops, 875, and itself again, right? 1.96875. All right, there's my point E. Okay, so now let's move on to point F. I think you kind of get the idea of what we're doing here over and over again. All right, point E to F, that gets us back to the parabola. So now we know we need to substitute in. The E and F have the same x coordinate, right? Which means that 1.96875. All right, well, these numbers are getting long, and I don't know that I really want to type in all these numbers, so let's go do a different way. So we're going to quit. We're going to go back to our main menu. Now, remember, we do have the equation in y equals, so remember that for a second. So let's go back to the beginning. The first time when we substituted the seed value, that would be f of x sub 0. That was our first iterate. So we can define what the word iterates is. An iterate is what happens when you substitute in f of x sub 0. You're going to get x sub 1. When you substitute in f of x sub 1, you're going to get x sub 2. When you substitute in f of x sub 2, you're going to get x sub 3. So this would be your first iterate, second iterate, and third iterate. All right, going to our first iterate, what do? We substitute in 0.25 into the equation. So if you go to vars, go to the right arrow, move over to y bars. We have our functions that we typed into y equals. In our first equation, we had typed in 4x minus 2x squared, and we had substituted the number 0.25 in there. So if we do that, we get, there's our 0.875. All right, and then we repeated that process. So we went and we substituted into the y equals equation. This time for point D, we substituted in 0.875, and we got the 1.96875, which is where, let's label these. This is iterate number 1, x sub 1. This is iterate number 2, that's x sub 2. We're sort of doing part B right here, right? So where it says, in the list below, circle the points that are iterates. So point B, point D, those are iterates. You can guess which one will be the next iterate, and that's the one that we need to do right now. All right, so we're trying to do point F, and that is x sub 3, and we need to substitute the number in. So we are going to go to second, not second vars, just regular vars. Move over to the right one, choose function y1, and I'm going to substitute in this number. Now, instead of typing this number again, I can go up and grab it, hit enter, and I'll show you another way to get to it the next time. All right, so now we got my y coordinate of 0.123046875. Now, I might start writing a truncated version of it, but we will save the full number in our calculator. All right, so now point G, we're going to follow our path. Right, it's on a horizontal line from F to G, so it should have the same y coordinate. So being on y equals x, the y coordinate, well, it'll have the same y coordinate as F and G, but it'll have the x coordinate, and y coordinate be the same, and that's going to be the 0.123. I'm just going to say ... comma 0.123 ... I want to say the ... because I know it goes on for a while rather than stopping at 0.123. All right, so now let's do our fourth iterate. I'll show you another way to get our fourth iterate. All right, we're going to circle the, well, actually, let's call it x sub 4. All right, here's our fourth iterate. Okay, so now we need to take that 0.123 number and substitute it in, because we know that point H is back on the parabola. All right, so let's go to vars, y vars, function, and let's use, instead of going up with the up arrow, I'm just going to hit second and then the negative sign, and that's going to pull up my answer of 0.123046875 and substitute it in where I said answer, and there's our next value. All right, so my x coordinate we know is 0.123 ... comma 0.4619 ... All right, now I know that point I is back on the green line, which is the line y equals x, so the x and y coordinates have to be the same, and it has the same y coordinate as point H, so that is 0.4619, comma 0.4619. All right, and then moving on to my fifth iterate, well, call this x sub 5. We're going to do our circling, because now we know this is my fifth iterate, and I should also highlight on my graph to show that that point J really is on the parabola. All right, so here's another way to do it. We're going to take second and entry. So now I'm going to do what happens when I substitute the previous answer of 0.4619 and so on into the function y1. As a reminder, y1 is from this menu, and you can put in many different equations. There's a y2, y3, but we just have one in there, so that's y1. Go back to that. So I'm just going to hit enter, and there's my next value that I need. All right, so my x-coordinate is 0.4619, comma, 1.4209, and so on. Now, remember, we're not truncating the value and substituting in just 1.4209. We're actually using that entire however many digits that is, because we don't want to have any rounding errors later. If we had rounded earlier, we would have rounding errors. All right, one more. And let's go up to our graph. So let's look at where k is. So I need to follow my line to figure out how to get from j to k. So that is back on our y equals x. And that means my x and y coordinates are the same. So it should be 1.4209, comma, 1.4209. All right, so to finalize this worksheet, it says use a straight edge to draw the next two iterates, label them L and M. All right, I don't have a straight edge, so I'm going to do my best to draw a nice turquoise line to figure out where are L and M. So I'm going to go back to my graph. We left off at K. All right, where is K? Here's K. All right, so K should lead us to the parabola, right? We want to go, we came from the parabola, now we need to get to the parabola. So we need to go up vertically, right? That's going to be point L. We'll label that as point L. And then we need to go horizontally to the green line, and that'll get us to point M. All right, and do we need to find the coordinates of those points? No. All right, use a straight edge to draw the next two iterates, label them as L and M. So we have done that, and we are finally done. But I'm just going to highlight those right there and just indicate where we drew those. All right, so that is all for today's video. Have a nice day.